Okay, good morning, everyone. Time for going live to get live. And right now, of course, I'm appearing green and purple and all those other different. And hopefully it'll stop soon. Okay, so we're in the middle of Perek Zayin Mishna Zayin. Discussion was where you have preserved or soaked something with, let's say, one kind of halach status and another. And because they have been immersed for 24 hours together, we say that each one absorbs flavor from the other one. So, for instance, we had a situation of a rose of Shemitah that was sitting in oil that was not Shemitah oil for 24 hours. So we said that if you take the rose out of the oil for the time of beer, then there will be no obligation of beer on the oil. There may be a status of Shemitah. There is a status of Shemitah produce on the oil because it absorbed the flavor from the Shemitah produce, but there would not be an obligation of beer. Beer would only take place where the rose itself had already come to the point of beer. That's when it was already 24 hours in oil. Then we say the oil also you have to do beer on. So now the Mishna is going to reiterate this idea in a more detailed way. Zah this is the rule. And as Bartanura points out, the rule the Mishna is saying here, it's not just a rule regarding Shemitah, there would be a rule over any kind of case where, let's say, something forbidden was soaking to something permissible. So here it goes. Zah this is the rule. Kol shehu b'naising tam. Any time something gives flavor into something else, chayav levayer, you'll be obligated to perform beer on, I guess in the case of Shemitah. Min b'she'ena minoi, if we're talking about two different things. We're talking about a rose in oil. Two different things. So then we say like this. If we say that the rose, the flavor of the rose, actually gives flavor into the oil, you'll be able to taste in the oil the flavor of the rose spices. And you can still taste that flavor. Then you come to the point of having an obligation to do beer in the case we said before, where the rose had already reached the stage of beer. There we're going to say that if the rose actually gives flavor into the oil, then the oil is going to have an obligation of beer. However, let's say the case is something else. It's a min b'minoi. It's two things that are of the same type. Two things of the same type. Shemitah wine and regular wine. That would be the case of Shemitah. We would say that if it's two of the same thing, kol shehu, then any amount is going to create the obligation for beer. So let me elaborate on this. The Bartanura says that right now the Mishna is telling us a rule that applies everywhere. The Mishna is phrasing it seemingly in a Shemitah context, but it really applies anywhere. So if, for instance, you were to have, we have two types of things. We have two types of mixtures. Min b'she'ena minoi, two different types of things mixed together, or min b'minoi, a type in its own type, two similar things that are mixed together. So if, let's say you were to have unkosher fish that got mixed in oil, and it stayed there for 24 hours together. You have fish, you have oil, two different types of things. So when it's two different types of things, the fish will only create a prohibition on the oil because the oil has absorbed the flavor from the fish if what's been absorbed from the fish can be tasted. It can be tasted, that is when it has the ability to change the status of the oil and forbid it. Otherwise, it is considered batal, it's considered nullified. And that is the concept that we have called batal v'shishim. If you have 60 times more of the permissible matter, the forbidden matter, then 60 times more, there's no more, you can't taste anymore the forbidden flavor. If it's less than 60 times more, you would be able to taste the flavor in it, and therefore it has the ability, it's considered that's still there, and it forbids the whole, and it makes the whole mixture forbidden. And in the case of Shemitah, if let's say you had a Shemitah carob that got mixed into regular oil, regular wine, right, non-Shemitah wine, so there too, if you have less than 60 times of the oil than the carob, then we say the carob flavor in the oil can be tasted. It now gives the Shemitah flavor is in the oil, and if this Shemitah flavor came out of a carob that already reached the point of beer, it's going to be beer also. So when you have a mixture of two different things, then we say if one thing gives flavor and the flavor is still detectable, the other thing is going to change the status of that other thing. In the case of the carob of Shemitah into the oil that's not Shemitah, the carob will now, if it reached the stage of beer, the carob flavor will now say the oil needs beer. If it's less than 60 times, you can't taste the carob flavor. It's like it's not there. It's butl, it's nullified. It makes no difference. So too, let's say not in the case of Shemitah, the forbidden fish in the permissible oil. I meant wine before, whatever the case is. If you have forbidden fish that goes into the permissible oil, if the flavor of the forbidden fish is detectable in the oil because it's less than 60 times the oil than the fish, and the flavoring that could come out of the fish, then we say if there's less than 60 times, then it's detectable. You could taste it. And it changes the status of the oil. The oil now has forbidden flavor in it. It's going to be forbidden. If there's 60 times more of the oil to the fish, to the entire fish, because we have to consider the possibility of an amount of flavor coming out equal to that of the fish itself. That has to do with the laws of bittul, of nullification. If you have 60 times, that means there's no more flavor. You can't detect anymore, and therefore it's bittul. It is nullified. But this is only in a case, what we just said now, this difference between 60 times and more, according to the Mishna says, is only when you have two different types of things. Where the taste it's two different things. So the taste of one could be detectable in the other. Let's say if we're talking about two of the same thing. For instance, we're talking about forbidden wine, because it was wine that was used for idolatry that got mixed into regular wine. Okay, two of the same thing. A piece of non-kosher meat mixed into a piece of kosher meat. That's called min b'minoi. They are of the same type. And when you have two of the same type, you can never detect the taste of one more than the other. According to this Mishnah, when you have that kind of situation, you can have a minuscule amount of the forbidden flavor in the permissible flavor, and it's going to make it forbidden. Because this Mishnah says, min b'minoi, when two things are of the same flavor, the same type, and therefore the same flavor, the flavor is not detectable, it's usher no matter how much is in there. That's the rule. No matter how much is in there, it's gonna forbid it. And therefore, in the situation of kosher meat and non-kosher meat, any little bit of non-kosher meat will give flavor into the kosher meat, and it's going to be you can have 100 times more, 1,000 times more. It's going to make it all forbidden. If you were to have a little bit of Shemitah wine that had to have beer on it, and it got mixed into 1,000 times more of non-Shemitah wine, it's going to create an obligation for beer. Because our Mishnah holds by min b'minoi, when you have two of the same thing, the halacha is it is never going to be bittul, it's never going to be nullified. That the Bajnur points out is not the actual halacha. The actual halacha is when you're talking about, let's say, kosher and non-kosher, the non-kosher wine and the kosher wine, according to Torah law, if you have a majority of kosher over the non-kosher will become nullified. The Rabbanan, according to rabbinic law, you need 60 times more, just like when it's two different types get mixed together. But the Mishnah's point, the Mishnah says, mina mina kosher. If it's the same type, any amount, even a minuscule amount, that's not the halacha. It's not the halacha by other things other than Shemitah. Shemitah, we will see, is going to be different, and we'll explain that soon. Shemitah does have the rule that if you have a little bit, even a minuscule amount in the same type, it's going to make it forbidden. That we'll discuss soon. But what the Mishnah was saying in the first part of the Mishnah, which really the Mishnah needs to be applicable to all things, that's not the halacha, that when two are the same thing, that any amount that gets mixed together is going to forbid the whole thing. According to Torah law, according to Torah law, if it's two different types of things that have two different flavors, then even according to Torah law, you need 60. Once you have 60 times more than permissible, it's going to nullify the forbidden. If it's the same type of thing, as long as you have a majority of permissible, it's going to nullify the forbidden. The rabbis said that we in order to make sure there's no kind of confusion between these two types of things of different and same, everything has to be the same. And even when you have two of the same type of thing, you need 60 times more than permissible to nullify the forbidden. Okay? Now, the Mishnah did use the wording chayav levayer in the first part of the Mishnah, obligation to be mevayer, to remove, which is a Shemitah law. And now the Mishnah seemingly is repeating the same thing, but in a little bit of a different context. And it says, Shavias, it's a repeat, but said a little bit different. Shavias Iseres Kol Shehu B'mina. Shemitah will forbid, that's an important word here. Shemitah will forbid any amount in the same type, which means Shemitah wine in non-Shemitah wine, even if you have a small amount of the Shemitah wine in the non-Shemitah wine, it's going to forbid it. That's the wording of the Mishnah. The Shalai B'mina, but if it's two different things, like the Shemitah Karab in the non-Shemitah wine, then it's B'nais and Tam. Then only if it gives flavor, which means there is not 60 times more of the non-Shemitah wine to the Karab, then it will forbid it also. So this is seemingly a repeat. It's not clear to me why it's repeating it, but what is a little bit different is the word Iseres, it forbids. Now, we spoke about an obligation to do beer, right? So you got to do beer, which actually, until you do beer, it is forbidden. And actually, if you don't do beer by the deadline for doing beer, it actually becomes forbidden to you. So the point the Mishnah is repeating, and I'm not sure why it's repeating it, but the Mishnah kind of said it in a general way, but it did say chayav levayer, which is Shemitah related. For some reason, the Mishnah does repeat the same idea, where it says Shavias Shemitah Iseres Kol Shehu B'mina will forbid, if it's from the same type, any amount will make it forbidden. If it's a different type, it's got to give flavor. The flavor has to be detectable. Now, the Bartanura points out that this statement, where it says Shemitah will forbid, Shemitah will affect, with any amount in the same type, that is the halacha. For other types of situations, like something forbidden and kosher and non-kosher mixed together, that's not the halacha. It's not the halacha that any amount is going to forbid it. By Shemitah, that is the halacha. The Bartanura doesn't say why is Shemitah different. So the Yad Avram here brings down that it's different because of the fact that actually was a fine that Chachamim put. Here you have a person, he's got, let's say this, he's got the Shemitah wine, and this Shemitah wine should have, he has an obligation to do beer on it, and he should be doing beer. And instead of doing beer, he waited around, and what happened? It got mixed into something else. And maybe it's even talking about after the deadline for beer already took place. Whatever it is, since we're talking about a situation of beer. And the Chachamim basically find this person for not doing beer when he should have, that even if any amount of what beer should have been done on gets mixed into something that's non-Shemitah, it will now create the status of beer when it got mixed in, no matter how little gets mixed in. And therefore, if what gets mixed in has an obligation for beer, you have to do beer on the thing that it got mixed into. If it was already after the deadline for beer, and therefore that carrot was actually forbidden to eat, it's going to make what it got mixed into forbidden. But that's specifically by Shemitah, because by Shemitah, the sages wanted to create a fine for not doing the beer when you should have. Now, at the same time, if that is the explanation as to why when two of the same get mixed together, we say any amount is going to forbid it, then we should say the same thing when two different things get mixed together, right? We said, even let's say when a carrot gets mixed into wine, where it's two different things, you didn't do beer on the carrot, and it got into the wine, it should forbid the wine, no matter how much of the carrot gets absorbed into the wine. That's not what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah says by Shvius, only when it's the same type do we say any amount forbids it. If it's a different type, then it has to be the nice and tam, it has to give flavor, which means it has to be less than 60, a ratio that has to be less than 60 times of the non-Shemitah, the Shemitah. So if the idea is that the Chachamim gave a fine for not performing beer, then it should apply even by two different things that got mixed together. So the commentaries explain that you're right. The reasoning behind it should apply in all cases, but it would come out that if by Shemitah we would say that even when two different things get mixed together, any amount will forbid it, any amount will now give the Shemitah status or the obligation, the laws of beer into the non-Shemitah oil in our case, where the camera of Shemitah got mixed into the oil, it would come out that that Shemitah would be even more severe than, let's say, something that was offered for idolatry, which becomes usher. But the halacha is that when that happens, if it's two different types of things, again, it's only if there is less than 60 times of the permissible that the idolatrous, the thing that we use for idolatry that's forbidden, will forbid it. So if, for instance, you had wine that was offered for idolatry, it got mixed into oil. Two different things. Well, if the only time the wine is going to make the oil forbidden is if there is less than 60 times of the permissible oil to the forbidden wine. That's the halacha. If we're going to say that, if let's say you have Shemitah wine that gets mixed into non-Shemitah oil, you're going to say, well, that's going to be forbidden, even if any amount gets mixed in. It comes out that Shemitah is even worse than something offered for idolatry, and the sages didn't want to do that. And therefore, they kept the rules the same. They kept the rule that when it comes to the two different things that mix together, they kept the rule the same. It depends on 60 times more or not. But when it's the same type of thing, that is when they were stringent and put on this fine. That's where they put in the fine to say that any amount was going to make it forbidden. Okay. At the same time, and I know this has been a busy Mishnah today. At the same time, it is that the Bartanura does point out that at the same time, if we are talking about that you took the carob out, or the Shemitah, carob would be the case where it's possible to say this. But if you go ahead and you take out the carob before the time of beer, so then the halacha, even by Shemitah, right? Let's say you have the carob that got mixed, the Shemitah carob got mixed into the non-Shemitah oil. If you remove it before beer, so then once you remove it before beer, then already we don't say that Shemitah is going to work differently than everything else, and even any amount is going to make it forbidden. You don't say that there. Only once it hits the point of beer is where we have this stringency that any amount of Shemitah will give a din of beer, status of beer, into what it got absorbed into. But if it's before beer, so just a question of the flavor of a Shemitah produce going into something else, and now giving that something else the status of Shemitah produce, that, for instance, you cannot ruin it, you cannot do business with it. For that, we follow the regular laws, that if we're talking about, whether we're talking about two different things, whether we're talking about the same type of thing, it follows the pattern of everything else. If there's 60 times more of the permissible to the forbidden is going to be not going to affect the permissible. If you have less of the permissible, less in our case, less of the non-Shemitah to the Shemitah, then the flavor absorbed from the Shemitah will give a status of Shemitah produce to the non-Shemitah produce. Whether again it's a carob that got mixed into oil, or it's going to be Shemitah wine that gets mixed into non-Shemitah wine. If there's 60 times more than non-Shemitah, it's not affected whatsoever. If there's less than 60 times of the non-Shemitah to the Shemitah, then the non-Shemitah will now get the status of Shemitah produce, that we say that you have to treat it with the sanctity of Shemitah. That's only going to be if, again, there is less than 60 times more of this non-Shemitah produce to the Shemitah produce. Then it's going to give it the status. But once you have 60 times more, it's going to nullify it. It's not going to make any kind of difference. Only once it absorbs from something, an obligation for beer, then it's of the same type, we say any amount is going to forbid it. There's two different types. Again, it follows the regular pattern. 60 times more will nullify, less than 60 times will nullify. Let's do now the Sefer HaMitzvot. Kind of stumbling block from one's home. Shenamar, as the pasuk states, you shall make a fence for your roof. You shall not place blood in your home. This is a mitzvah that if a person has a roof, people go up on the roof. If you don't have a fence around it, somebody could fall off, chas v'shalom, and get killed. And therefore, the Torah puts upon us an obligation to make a fence that is high enough, that is 10 tefachim, 10 handbreadths high, about 40 inches or so high, to protect someone from falling off. It's not the Torah's obligation doesn't only apply to a fence around a roof; it applies to any kind of situation, as we're going to see, any kind of situation of a of what could cause danger to life. If anybody leaves his roof without a fence, Mikal mitzvah saseh, and disobey this positive commandment. Any type of stumbling in your house, any kind of stumbling block, any kind of obstacle that could actually create a danger to life, could go in the air or bar. You have a well or you have a pit. So again, it's not a roof, but again, it's an area that can cause danger to life. You have to build a wall around it that is 10 tefachim high. The wall has to be strong enough. They can lean on it. It's not going to collapse. Now, another halacha that we derive from this mitzvah that has nothing to do with building anything, and that is you cannot raise a vicious dog in your house. Somebody could walk in, and that vicious dog is going to attack him. That's called creating a stumbling block that can cause a danger to life in your house, and you cannot create that in your house. The Kasser b'Sefer Charedim. The Sefer Charedim writes. Sefer Charedim was a work on the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. When a person takes to heart this mitzvah every day, and he looks around to see if anything needs to be fixed. He looks around to see if there's any kind of stumbling block that could cause danger to life, and he looks around to make sure to see does anything need to be fixed or not. That's considered fulfilling this mitzvah every day. It's every day, meaning you don't, according to the Sefer Charedim, you don't have to actually build this wall to get the mitzvah. If you are aware and watching out every single day to make sure that there is nothing causing danger to life in your house, and if there would be, you would fix it every day that you're paying attention to make sure whether something needs to be fixed or not, to protect from danger to life, you have fulfilled that mitzvah. This applies at all places, at all times, both by men and by women. Anybody who owns any kind of situation where this kind of danger to life can come about has an obligation to create, to protect people from that, whether it be building a wall around the hole, whether it be, whatever kind of situation there would be to remove any kind of danger, any kind of stumbling block that would be a danger to life. Have a wonderful day.